The rain came down harder than ever, turning the jungle floor into thick sludge that clung to Ryan Blake's boots. With every step he took, the air was thick with smoke and steam, and the scent of gunpowder still lingered hours after the ambush had scattered his team into the green hell around him. He moved with the caution of a man trained to survive in chaos. Every leaf, every broken branch, a potential trap, yet something pulled him deeper, a strange feeling in his gut that told him someone was out there waiting not for rescue but for something far darker. He found her by accident, or maybe it was fate. She lay slumped against the base of a wide trunk, her uniform almost indistinguishable from the mud and leaves around her, her hair plastered. To her face with blood and water, one leg twisted unnaturally and the other trembling. She looked like a ghost, her skin pale and slick with sweat, her lips slightly parted, but no sound coming from them. Blake dropped to one knee, instinct taking over, as he checked her pulse steady but faint, then scanned her for visible wounds aside from the leg. There was a shallow gash across her ribs and bruises that hinted at more damage inside, but still she made no sound. She stared at him with eyes wide, open and unblinking, as if staring through him rather than at him. Her pupils were dilated too much for the jungle light, and her breathing was shallow but rhythmic. Blake spoke to her calmly, first asking her name, then her rank, then simply if she could hear him, but she gave no answer, not even a blink. Instead, she clutched something tightly in her right hand, her knuckles white with the effort, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to this world. He pried her fingers open gently, and saw it was a dog tag, worn and rusted. Not hers. He could tell immediately from the name and number scratched deep into the metal. It belonged to someone from SEAL Team 4, the same team that had vanished without a trace during an op in the Panamanian Highlands 2 years ago. The mission had been buried under layers of classification, and every operative listed as KIA or MIA. No remains recovered. No explanation offered, only silence. A shiver crawled down Blake's spine, and he looked back into her eyes. But she had already turned her head slowly toward the jungle, as if something had just moved out there. Something she could feel, even if she could not see. And with that same trembling hand, she pointed toward the trees, the way her fingers moved, hesitant and halting, made his throat dry. She wasn't just pointing at something, she was warning him. Blake looked but saw nothing, only the thick curtain of vines and rain and shadows that moved without wind. He reached for his comms again, but still nothing but static. Their frequencies were jammed, and he knew better than to trust that as coincidence he scanned the tree line again, and this time he thought he saw something. Not a person but a glimmer of light, or maybe reflection, gone. As quickly as it appeared, he decided he had to get her out now. No matter what lay ahead, she wouldn't survive the night with that leg, and whatever had driven her to this state wasn't going to wait until sunrise. He lifted her carefully. She didn't resist, didn't even flinch. Her eyes remained open, locked on the jungle behind them, and even though she hadn't spoken a word, he could feel the urgency in her silence. They moved slowly, him carrying her through thick underbrush and uneven ground. Every few yards he stopped to listen, but the jungle was a liar. It made its own music of whispers and creaks and cries from unseen mouths, and Blake had been in it long enough to know that sometimes it sang loudest when it wanted to cover the sound of something worse. They reached a hollow in the terrain where Blake had set up a crude shelter after the ambush. It wasn't much more than a camo tarp and a few poles, but it was enough to give her cover from the rain and let him stabilize the leg using gauze tape and a morphine injection. He worked with practiced speed, but she never looked away from the tree line, her face blank and unmoving, except for a single tear that rolled down her cheek and vanished in the mud when he asked her, Again who she was, she slowly reached into her vest and pulled out a small notebook soaked through and falling apart. The pages stuck together with dirt and something darker. She handed it to him and closed her eyes as if the act of giving it away cost her more than blood. He opened it carefully, flipping through scrawled entries, some barely legible, others written in block letters like someone had been trying to hold on to reason. One phrase kept repeating. Subject echo, along with a series of coordinates and mentions of tunnels, unauthorized tests, and a name crossed out with thick black ink again and again, as if to erase it from existence. One page described bodies found in sealed chambers, faces distorted like they'd been screaming. When they died, another had a diagram of a facility buried beneath jungle soil with only one entrance marked by an X and circled over and over again. Then a loose page slipped out from the back and fell to the ground. Blake picked it up and froze. The writing was familiar. Not just the name, but the tone and style. It was from Caleb Marsh, a SEAL from his own training unit who had disappeared during that same op 2 years ago. The note ended with a line that made Blake's skin crawl. If you find this, we are not dead. We are changed. Before he could make sense of what he had just read, the woman opened her eyes again, and they were no longer just vacant or afraid. They were burning with something else entirely. She reached up and touched his shoulder with that same trembling hand, and then turned her gaze slowly toward the shelter entrance. And Blake heard it too. A sound like footsteps, but heavier and uneven, like something walking that had forgotten how. Blake froze every muscle in, his body stiff as the sound outside grew louder, not fast, not urgent, but steady, like something that had no reason to rush, as if it already knew exactly where they were. He looked at the woman whose eyes had shifted from fear to something else. Something closer to resignation and maybe even recognition. Her hand tightened around the edge of the cot she lay on, and her chest rose and fell with short, shallow breaths. But still, she did not speak. He moved silently, reaching for his weapon, checking the chamber, then slowly edging toward the flap of the shelter. The jungle outside was darker now, the clouds thicker, the rain lighter, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The sound came again, closer now and clearer, something dragging something, limping something, moving without care for stealth. And in that moment, Blake knew they were being hunted, not by soldiers, not by animals, but by something else. Something twisted and wrong. He stepped outside the barrel of his rifle, sweeping left. Then, right. But nothing moved in the trees. The vines hung still. The leaves barely stirred, yet the feeling in his chest told him the threat was near closer than it had any right to be. He backed into the shelter slowly and saw the woman had sat up now, against the cot pane etched across her face. Her skin pale with sweat, but her eyes alive and alert. And she held out the notebook again, flipping it to a page near the back. The words on it were jagged, messy, written with hands that had clearly been shaking for hours, maybe days. There are more of them. It read, they hear movement. They sense adrenaline. They remember what they used to be. Blake's heart thudded heavier with each line, and below the writing was a crude drawing, not of a man, not of a beast, but something in between. It had limbs too long for its body, a face with features melted together, and a chest cavity that looked like it had been torn open and sewn shut again. The word subject echo appeared beneath it, circled several times, with lines drawn out from it, connecting to smaller notes written in the margins. Escape, failed override, denied, we were the test. He looked up at her, and this time she nodded just once. And for a second, Blake saw through her silence, not fear, but fury. She wanted to fight, but her body was failing her. The only weapon she had left was him, and what was left of that cursed notebook. The sound returned, this time directly outside the shelter, and Blake held his breath as the shadows shifted again. Something massive moving just beyond the flap. He raised his weapon, and for a single moment he thought he saw it through the crack in the canvas, a figure almost human but too tall, its posture jerky, as if bones no longer bent. The way they should, it stopped, directly in front of the entrance, and there was a long pause, silence so thick Blake could hear the blood in his ears. Then the figure turned and walked away, the footsteps fading, but Blake knew it was not gone, not really. It was waiting, testing them, measuring their responses the same way a predator stalks the wounded not out of mercy, but patience. He moved quickly, packing the essentials into his rucksack and securing the woman's leg for transport. She gritted her teeth and held onto his arm. As he lifted her again, she was light, too light, like she had not eaten in days, maybe weeks, and he felt the ridge of her ribs beneath the wet uniform. They moved through the jungle in silence, the rain falling in a whisper now. Like it, too, feared the things that walked beneath the canopy. The woman held the notebook tight against her chest, and every few minutes pointed in a new direction, leading him not toward safety, but deeper into the nightmare she had come from. After an hour they reached a small rise overgrown with moss and trees, and halfway up it she tapped his shoulder and pointed toward a half-buried mound hidden beneath rotted palm leaves. Blake cleared them away, revealing a steel hatch. Its paint faded, the words above it barely legible, but still. Their DOD property. No entry, unauthorized personnel will be detained. He looked at her. She nodded again, and he turned the handle, the metal groaning under the weight of time and rain, and something more, the door. Opened with a hiss, and a stench rolled out like something long dead and never buried. The air was thick with mildew and rust and something sharper beneath it, something like antiseptic and copper. He helped her down the ladder first, then followed. Sealing the hatch behind them, they descended into darkness lit only by a flickering emergency light that cast long, twisted shadows across the narrow corridor. The walls were lined with peeling paint and old signage, directional arrows pointing toward labs, medical bays, containment units. Blake moved forward, weapon raised, the woman beside him, limping but moving with determination, as if her body remembered the way. Even if her mind tried to forget, they reached a heavy door sealed with a code panel. Long dead, its screen cracked, but beside it was a manual override lever, rusted but intact. He pulled it hard and the door groaned open, revealing a chamber filled with old equipment crates marked with biohazard signs and lockers with broken hinges. In the far corner, a reinforced glass wall stood, shattered jagged edges like teeth, and behind it, an empty chamber, wires hanging from the ceiling, restraints dangling from the walls, and on the floor, deep gouges carved into the concrete, as if something inside had tried to climb out and had finally succeeded. The woman stepped forward, her hand brushing against the edge of the broken glass, and she turned to Blake, her lips parting as if to speak. But instead she reached down and picked up a small metallic device from the ground, a recorder scratched and dented but still intact. She pressed play, and the static gave way to a voice hoarse and broken. "If you are hearing this, then echo is loose and containment has failed. This is Lieutenant Caleb Marsh. We tried to stop it. God, we tried. But it adapts. It learns. It remembers who we were, and it knows how to use us against ourselves. Do not stay. Do not try to fight it. It is not a man. It is not a monster. It is both and neither. And if she survived, then she is the only one who knows how to end it." The recording ended with a crackle, and the woman's hand dropped to her side. Blake stared at her, the silence between them heavier than ever before, and then she moved toward the back of the room where another door stood, marked Vault Access Level 7. The keypad beside it was glowing faintly, still powered, and she reached toward it as if her fingers already knew the code. Blake stopped her gently and shook his head. They needed to know what they were walking into, and there was no way out once they entered. This wasn't just about her anymore, or the men who had died or vanished. This was bigger. It was about whatever the government had buried here beneath the jungle. Whatever. They had turned into weapon or mistake or both. She looked at him, and for the first time her lips formed a name. She whispered it like it hurt her to say it. Echo. And when she did, the lights above them flickered once, twice. And then something banged against the door from the other side, not with rage, but with purpose, like it had heard her, and it was waiting to be let in. The banging on the door was relentless, a dull, rhythmic pounding like the heartbeat of something that had waited far too long. In the darkness, Blake's grip on his rifle tightened the woman by his side, now fully upright despite the pain in her leg, her eyes blazing with a strange mixture of fear and determination. She whispered again, Echo, as if speaking the name, summoned the thing outside into their reality. The metal door shuddered under the force of another blow, and then the lights flickered, sending long, sinister shadows crawling across the walls. Blake moved toward the control panel, running his fingers over the worn keypad as if hoping some forgotten code would appear in his memory. But there was nothing, only the faint hum of ancient machinery struggling to stay alive in the depths of the jungle beneath the earth, and as the door rattled like a beast trying to break free. He glanced at the woman whose gaze was fixed on the cracked glass that separated them from the empty chamber, where the shattered restraints still swung gently in the cold artificial breeze. They didn't have a choice. The door could not hold for long, and the thing out there was learning. It was adapting faster than anyone had predicted, and the only thing that might stop it was whatever was locked inside that vault behind her, a place marked Level 7, the highest. Security clearance of all, and she was the key to opening it. Blake had to trust her instincts even if they defied every survival manual he had ever studied. She stepped forward, slowly reaching for the keypad this time, and as her fingers brushed, the buttons, the flickering lights suddenly stabilized, and the door behind them hissed shut, locking with a finality that sent a chill down Blake's spine. The pounding stopped, and for a moment there was silence so thick it felt as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, from the speakers embedded in the walls, a voice crackled to life, cold, mechanical, and emotionless. It said, "Containment breach protocol. Activated lockdown, initiated subject, Echo containment, priority." One Blake's eyes darted to the woman who nodded grimly. She pressed a series of numbers and letters into the keypad with precision born from memory, and the vault door began to grind open. A sound both terrifying and hopeful, at the same time the smell of disinfectant. And old blood washed over them as they stepped inside a cavernous room filled with rows of sealed capsules, each one marked with a label and dates. The woman moved quickly to one of the capsules near the center, its glass frosted over and covered in condensation, but there was movement inside, something alive, or perhaps barely living. She tapped the glass and whispered a name, the same name that Blake had heard in the recording, Caleb Marsh, the man they had both thought lost forever. The glass panel hissed and began to slide open, releasing a rush of stale air, and when the figure inside emerged, Blake almost dropped his rifle. It was Caleb, but changed different, his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light, and his skin pale almost, translucent, but the rage and pain in his expression was unmistakable. Marsh looked at the woman and then at Blake, and with a voice hoarse and broken said, "You shouldn't have come here. This place is a tomb for the dead and the damned. We tried to contain it, but it's beyond containment. Now, Echo is not just one creature, it's a hive, a collective consciousness born from the experiments that fused our DNA with something alien, something we were never meant to touch." Blake asked, "What was the purpose of those experiments?" And Marsh spat back, "To create super soldiers, but instead they created monsters. Soldiers who could remember every kill, every scream, every moment of pain, and use it to become more than human, but in the process, lost. their souls and their minds, and then the military sealed us underground hoping we would die or at least be forgotten. The woman took a step forward and Blake saw the hesitation in Marsh's eyes, the recognition in the way he looked at her like she was the last link to the man they used to be, before the experiments, before the transformation. She said we have to stop it before it spreads, before more, get hurt before we lose ourselves completely. Marsh nodded, but warned it would not be easy. Echo adapts to fear and hesitation. It learns from pain and suffering. The more we resist, the stronger it becomes, but there is one weakness. A code embedded in our DNA. A failsafe hidden in the original sequence that can shut it down permanently. Blake asked how they could access it, and Marsh said the vault contained a terminal with the override, but it was guarded by layers of security systems and defense mechanisms left to prevent anyone from activating it without authorization, and worse, the more they used the vault, the more Echo was alerted to their presence. Suddenly the lights flickered again, and the hum of machinery shifted to a low growl, as if the entire facility was waking up, sensing intruders in its core, and the woman looked at Blake and Marsh and said, "We don't have much time." The door behind them began to shake, and somewhere deep in the tunnels a scream echoed a sound that was not human and not quite animal. A sound that froze Blake's blood and made him realize the nightmare was only just beginning. They moved quickly toward the terminal, a narrow corridor lined with old security cameras, some blinking erratically, others dead, and the woman guided them to a panel covered in dust and grime. She wiped it clean, revealing a keypad and biometric scanner. Blake placed his hand on the scanner, and the machine beeped an error signal the security was still active, and the woman pulled from her pocket a small device, something like a flash drive, and inserted it into the port. The screen flickered and then accepted the override code, a series of numbers and symbols that Blake could not hope to understand, but that worked. The terminal lit up with a map of the facility, and a countdown timer appeared flashing, red signaling the time before total lockdown and potential system failure. Blake and the others had to move fast, but before they could make a plan, the corridor behind them exploded inward, the door shattered, and a massive figure loomed silhouetted. In the darkness, a grotesque fusion of muscle and machine with eyes that glowed like molten metal and claws sharp enough to tear steel. Marsh grabbed Blake and the woman, pulling them into a side room as the creature advanced its heavy footsteps. Shaking the ground and the sound of metal scraping against concrete filled the air. The woman whispered the code to activate the failsafe, and Blake felt the weight of every second ticking by the creature pounding on the door just inches away, and then they hit enter, and the facility shuddered, the lights went out, and for a moment, there was silence. Then a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once filled the air, and the creature howled in pain, slamming against the walls, retreating down the corridor, and the countdown stopped. The lockdown reversed, and the hum of the machines died down to a gentle pulse like a heartbeat. Finally calm, but for how long, Blake did not know. He looked at Marsh and the woman, and saw in their eyes exhaustion, but also a spark of hope that maybe this nightmare could end here. But then the terminal beeped again, and a new message appeared. Warning: containment breach, unresolved subject, Echo active. And Blake knew deep down the fight was far from over. The message glowed ominously on the cracked screen, a blinking warning that refused to fade like a pulse from some malevolent heart. Blake stared at it, knowing the nightmare was far from over. The countdown had stopped, but the fight was not won. The woman stood silently beside him, her eyes scanning the dim room filled with broken machines and blood-stained walls. The air heavy with the scent of damp metal, and something fouler, something that clawed at the back of his mind like a whisper of doom. Marsh sat slumped against the wall, his body exhausted, but his gaze sharp and calculating. Even in his weakened state, he seemed to understand the stakes better than anyone else. Blake swallowed hard and wondered If he could have the strength to keep going when all his instincts screamed to run to escape this place and never look back. The vault door was sealed shut behind them, a cold reminder of their trap, and the deeper tunnels echoed with distant sounds. The soft but unmistakable patter of footsteps that did not belong to any living soldier or animal. The woman touched Blake's arm and nodded toward the terminal, which now displayed a complex map of the entire facility, the lines and symbols shifting, in real time showing multiple breaches and active sensors tracking their every move. She explained the failsafe had been partially activated, shutting down the most dangerous containment units, but the core of the Echo virus was still alive somewhere. Deep inside the old research lab, a place that even the military had feared to enter once the outbreak began. It had been sealed off with no hope of rescue for anyone trapped inside. Blake felt a cold sweat bead at his temple as they made their way. Through the twisting corridors, the walls closing in, as if the building itself was alive, breathing, and watching every step they took their only guide, the flickering emergency lights casting long shadows that danced just beyond their vision. Suddenly, the woman stopped cold. A hand raised as if to silence the air itself. Blake heard it too, a faint whisper, a soft, almost inaudible voice calling names. Names he did not recognize, but carried the weight of sorrow and warning. The woman's eyes widened, and she whispered it again, echo this time, as a prayer and a curse. They reached a junction where the map showed two paths, one leading deeper into the facility, the other toward an emergency exit that was long sealed, but might offer a way out if they could reach it before the system shut down completely. Marsh pointed to the path leading deeper and said, "This is where we end it, or we die trying." They chose the path forward, the woman leading the way, her pace steady, despite the pain. Evident. In every step, Blake could feel something in her driving her forward, not just survival, but a desperate hope to end what had started here. So long ago as they moved, the air grew colder. The silence heavier, broken only by the occasional drip of water, echoing through the halls. Then a scream tore through the stillness, sharp and broken. A sound that froze Blake in place, his heart pounding in his ears. It came from the lab ahead, the place where the Echo virus had mutated and evolved beyond anyone's control. They rushed toward the sound, the walls narrowing and the light dimming until they reached a massive steel door. The only entrance to the lab, its surface scratched and scorched as if a battle had taken place right here. A keypad blinked with a warning in red letters, "Quarantine breach detected." The woman pulled out the recorder again, playing a final message recorded by the original team trapped inside the lab, their voices raw with fear and desperation, warning anyone who found them to turn back, that the creature inside was more than a virus, more than a monster. It was a nightmare, made flesh, a predator that could mimic memories and voices to lure victims into its trap. Blake glanced at her and saw tears in her eyes, the weight of the truth crashing down on her like a tidal wave. But she steeled herself, pressed the code, and the door hissed open, revealing a lab filled with broken, equipment-shattered glass and a thick mist that curled along the floor like smoke inside shadows, moved without source shapes, flickering in the fog. Blake's rifle swept the area as Marsh and the woman followed closely, their breaths shallow, their senses heightened to every sound, every movement. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the mist, a man, or what was left of one, his face twisted with pain and rage, eyes glowing the same unnatural light Blake had seen before. This was not just a victim, but a host, a creature consumed by the Echo virus, yet still holding fragments of his humanity. The figure reached out, speaking in a voice that was not quite his own, calling the woman by name. And Blake saw the conflict in her eyes, a moment of recognition, before she shook it off and raised her weapon, firing a burst that sent the creature stumbling. Back into the fog more shapes appeared from the mist, some human, others distorted with mutations, and Blake realized the virus did not just infect it, changed the very essence of those it touched, creating a legion of horrors bound by a shared consciousness, and a hunger for survival at any cost. They fought their way deeper into the lab, the woman guiding them to the core where the virus was stored in a massive containment unit surrounded by security measures designed to keep the nightmare locked away. Forever Marsh worked quickly at the controls initiating the failsafe, while Blake and the woman guarded the door, fighting off waves of infected that kept coming their way, relentless and terrifying. The countdown resumed on the terminal each second, ticking by like a hammer on their nerves, and just as the failsafe activated, a monstrous roar shook the facility and the walls began to collapse, trapping the infected and hopefully the echo virus itself inside a tomb of concrete and steel. They barely escaped the vault before the tunnels sealed behind them, the air thick with dust, and the silence that followed was almost worse than the chaos that had preceded it. Outside, the rain had stopped the jungle quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath after the storm. Blake looked at the woman whose wounds had finally begun to close, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion and fear. But as they made their way back toward their extraction point, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the shadows, the nightmare was still alive, waiting for another chance. The dog tag in her hand glinted in the fading light, a reminder of those lost and the secrets buried beneath the jungle forever.